Are we heading towards a global recession? We've asked this question before on the show, and in the days and weeks ahead, you'll hear it again on this platform and on others. You'll see the word recession in more headlines. You'll hear about interest rates and fiscal tightening. That's because the picture does not look good. Inflation is rising, stock markets are crashing, Western sanctions are backfiring, and central banks are raising rates. It's the same story across the board. Some countries worse hit than others, but everyone is hurting. The last 2 years have been bad for the global economy. It shrunk by almost 4.5% in 2020. This was supposed to be the year of rebound and recovery, the year 2022. But the war in Ukraine and China's zero COVID disruptions hurt the whole world. So where are we headed now? Will a recession mean another crisis? Will it be severe or mild? They say recession is when a neighbor loses his or her job. Depression is when you lose yours. Well, we hope neither comes. Tonight on Gravitas, we'll analyze which way things are going. Monday sets the tone for the entire week. If your Monday is good, you're off to a good start, they say. I'm afraid that's not the case today, especially if you've invested your money in stocks. Here in India, it was a bloodbath. The Nifty closed 2.6% down, the Sensex almost 2.7%. Put together, investors lost around 6 lakh crore rupees in one day. That's around $76 billion. The stock market was trending on Twitter today. And when that happens, it's usually bad news. Because stocks are like umpires in cricket. On a normal day, nobody notices them. But if you do, it means they've done something wrong. Same thing with the stock market. The question is why? Why are Indian markets bleeding money? Because of 4 major reasons. Number one, rising inflation in India. Data from the month of May was published today. Inflation was at 7.04%. It is lower than the month before, but it's still above the RBI's limit, which means more interest hikes could be lined up. Reason number 2, signals from the US Federal Reserve. Now, this is uncharted territory for America. Their inflation is more than 8%, and these levels were last seen 40 years ago. So the Fed is almost in cruise control. They're hiking interest rates every month. Reason number 3, a weakening rupee. Last month, $1 was equal to 77.5 rupees. Now it's more than 78 rupees. And this is happening all over Asia. Local currencies are losing out against the US dollar. Take the Japanese yen. Last month, $1 was equal to 129 yen. Now it's 134 yen. The lowest value in more than 2 decades. When local currencies lose value, so do stocks. Foreign investors begin pulling their money out. And that's reason number 4. An exodus of foreign investors. Where exactly are they going? Stocks are too volatile. Currencies are fluctuating. Bitcoin is plunging. So what do investors do? They look for safer investments. In this case, US Treasury bonds. For 8 consecutive months, foreign investors have been net sellers in India. What does that mean? It means that they sold more than they bought. This month, they've sold stocks worth 14,000 crore rupees, 14,000 crore in less than 14 days. We call this a sell-off. And when there's a sell-off, stock markets plunge. Japan's Nikkei closed down 3%, around 3%. South Korea's Kospi was down 3.3%. And in Hong Kong, the Hang Seng fell 3.4%. Same story everywhere. In Britain, people are talking about a recession, and the numbers should tell you why. In the month of March, Britain's GDP fell 0.1%. In April, the GDP fell again, this time 0.3%. So that's 2 months of falling economic output. Where does that leave Britain? On the brink of a recession. The market was expecting the GDP to rise 0.1%. Instead, it fell 0.3%, which means the data was a surprise. The British economy is weaker than it appears. Experts say economic stagnation is a guarantee, and stagnation to recession is usually a short hop. Which brings us to the big question. Is a recession avoidable? There is no consensus yet. By some estimates, inflation will ease out by September this year, and if that's the case, central banks can start slashing interest rates. Economic growth could pick up again. But what if inflation does not ease out? Brent crude is still trading at more than $120 per barrel. Inflation is still setting new records. And remember, this is after central banks intervening. More than 50 central banks have increased interest rates by 50 basis points. India's RBI is one of them. Yet inflation is not cooling down. And that is the big worry for the global economy. You're sacrificing growth to contain inflation. But if that strategy fails, you're left with nothing. No growth plus higher inflation. Right now, things are heading in this direction. The global economy was expected to grow 4.5% this year, but that was before inflation began to bite. The new forecast is 3%. At the same time, inflation estimates have doubled to 9%. So coming back to my question, can we avoid a recession? The answer depends on what happens in Ukraine. If the war drags on, so will the economic pain. Oil prices will remain high, food shortages will persist, and more countries will feel the pinch. Take Egypt, for example. The war has battered their finances. Egypt will have to spend $10 billion on fuel and food. Now, $10 billion is a lot of money for Egypt. Their economy was already battered by the pandemic. Income from tourism had disappeared. Foreign investors were pulling out, so the war is like a double whammy for them. If the fighting ends, governments will have more clarity, more levers to control inflation. If not, 2022 could end in recession. So markets across the world are in distress, but they're still better off when you look at Pakistan. Pakistan is the second worst performing market in Asia, trailing just behind crisis-laden Sri Lanka. And if we go by market trends, Pakistan could end up worse than Sri Lanka. Look at these developments. Last Thursday, Pakistan's market capitalization sunk to 6.95 trillion Pakistani rupees. More than 16% of investments were wiped out from the stock exchange. That's equivalent to 1.35 trillion Pakistani rupees, close to $4 billion US. This is a new record in itself, and it's a multi-year low. Pakistani markets have not witnessed a bloodbath of the scale in recent years. So what explains this meltdown? The ongoing political turmoil. It's taking a toll on the economy, plunging the finances to new lows. The biggest worry is Pakistan's external debt. Actually, scratch that. The biggest worry is Pakistan's political class. Instead of trying to fix the economy, they're trading charges. The ruling party, the PMLN, says Imran Khan messed things up. Imran Khan's party, the PTI, says Shehbaz Sharif has made it worse. And look at the magnitude of the problem they face. Pakistan's external debt stands at $249 billion. $249 billion. For perspective, that's more than the GDP of Sri Lanka, Nepal and Afghanistan combined. That's how big Pakistan's debt is. The government is blaming Imran Khan for it. Pakistan's information minister has shared a video. It features a former finance minister, a minister in the Imran Khan government, apparently admitting that Imran Khan took humongous loans and made the debt crisis worse. Listen to this.
आपके डेट टू जीडीपी पे कहते हैं कि जनाबे वाला जब से पाकिस्तान बना था तब से लेके जब तक इनकी हुकूमत आई उसके बाद इन्होंने 30% जो है वो डेट जो है वो बढ़ाया 80% तो नहीं बढ़ा उन सालों में ठीक है उसमें 76% जरूर बढ़ा है। इनको ये समझ आनी चाहिए कि नंबर झूठ नहीं बोलते। अगर आप इतना मर्जी स्पिन डॉक्टरी करें ये नंबर आपके सामने आएंगे और आपका मुंह चढ़ाएंगे।
Now, we've not been able to verify the authenticity of this clip, but the government of Pakistan is not waiting for verification. The information minister has called it an admission of guilt. The current finance minister has shared some data to back these claims. Here's what he posted. This is from the finance minister of Pakistan, and this is what he says. Under PTI, the total government debt increased from 24,000 billion rupees to 44,000 billion rupees, an increase of 78%. The total debt plus liabilities increased from 29,000 billion rupees to 53,000 billion rupees, which is an increase of 79%. 78% government debt, 79% total debt, 0% accountability. The Pakistan government's message is quite clear. It inherited a weak economy from the PTI. It needs more time to get things back on track. The PTI, though, refuses to accept this argument. We have a statement from Fawad Chaudhry. He was the Science and Technology Minister under Imran Khan. This is what he has said. When you keep playing Candy Crush all the time, you will do the same stupid thing. The PTI government borrowed a total of 52 billion, of which 38 billion was to pay back the loans taken out by the previous governments. If you do not like the arrangements made with the IMF, then why does your poor government go to the board? Well, I don't know what's funnier. The fact that he mentioned Candy Crush or the fact that he called his government poor. He speaks as if his own government had the Midas touch. They could barely stay afloat. Same with the current government, led by the PMLN. On Friday, they released the annual budget, a budget aimed at trimming Pakistan's deficit by slashing spending across the board. They announced cuts. The government was hoping that this budget will help it secure more loans. Economists, though, do not agree. Here's what they're saying. Pakistan's budget is not enough to unlock an IMF loan, a loan from the International Monetary Fund. This is according to economists at Citigroup, one of the world's biggest investment banks. They've analyzed Pakistan's annual budget and they do not see much hope of a rebound. They say the policy decisions will not be enough to secure an IMF loan. How much loan is Pakistan seeking from the IMF? $900 million. What is the IMF asking for in return? Besides stricter financial policies, they want Pakistan to rethink their deals with China, specifically the ones related to CPEC, that's the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor. The IMF says Pakistan should renegotiate these deals with China, the CPEC deals. It should try bargaining. It should reduce outstanding payments. It says this is necessary for financial stability because Chinese companies could be overcharging Pakistan. This is the International Monetary Fund. Guess how Pakistan has responded to the IMF's appeal? On Friday, in its annual budget, Pakistan announced that it's going to fast-track CPEC projects. And that's not all. Pakistan is also going to fast-track the setting up of special economic zones under CPEC. So what happened to renegotiating the payments? Islamabad has not commented so far, and experts say it's never going to happen. That's because CPEC projects fall under the jurisdiction of China. It is the Chinese judicial system that determines what happens and what does not when it comes to CPEC. In other words, Pakistan does not have an equal say in CPEC. It is in no position to renegotiate the deals. Neither can Pakistan walk away from the projects. To do any of this, it will have luck. He tried renegotiating the terms and conditions with China. He tried to redefine the goals of CPEC. He was rebuffed by China, and upset Beijing even summoned Pakistan's army chief. It shows the kind of leverage that China has over Pakistan when it comes to CPEC projects. 4 years on, another government has come to power and it is asked to renegotiate the deals with China, and guess how China responds? It has once again summoned Pakistan's army chief, General Qamar Javed Bajwa. He led a team of military officials to Beijing over the weekend. What for? Well, no word from Pakistan, but it's not very hard to guess. The China-Pakistan Economic Corridor, aka Pakistan's highway to doom. For the moment, we'll shift to Sri Lanka. The country was forced to declare a holiday today because there was no fuel to keep it running. The fuel crisis, we are told, has become worse. The government of Sri Lanka has come up with a way to ration fuel. Starting July, consumers will have to register themselves at fuel stations, following which they will be given their weekly quota of petrol or gasoline. Our next report tells you more.
What's the chronology of a deteriorating situation? It goes from good to bad, and then from bad to worse. Sometimes quickly, sometimes over a period of time. In Sri Lanka, the situation has been going downhill for months now. And just when we thought the country had hit rock bottom, we are being told there's more. The news is that the fuel crisis in Lanka is becoming worse. Now, what does that look like? Let's find out. It's a government holiday in Sri Lanka today. Roads are empty. There aren't too many cars or buses. It is not a freedom fighter's birth anniversary. It's not even a special day in Lankan history. But just another day in what's being called Sri Lanka's darkest period. It is a holiday because there is no fuel to run the country. So students and public servants have been asked to stay home. Tomorrow is a holiday too. How long can a country go on like this? The government plans to ration fuel. Soon, Lankans will have to register themselves at energy stations. And only following that will they be given their weekly quota of fuel. The scheme will come into effect in July. Details have not been announced yet, but Energy Minister Kachana Wijesekera has made it clear that his government is left with no choice. This quota system is not unprecedented. Around a month ago, Colombo had announced rationing fuel for motorists. The mandate said no more than 4 liters of petrol at once for two-wheelers, 5 liters of petrol for three-wheelers, and 19.5 liters of gasoline or diesel for cars and SUVs. If a driver wants more fuel, then he or she would have to go back and stand in the long queue all over again. Most of these queues run into kilometers. We were witness to this ordeal over the weekend.
Look at these pictures. There are long queues on either side of the road. On this side are four-wheelers. On my left are tuk-tuks and two-wheelers. And this queue, I'm told, stretches beyond a kilometer. And these people are waiting to get their fuel tanks filled. The wait takes anywhere between 2 to 10 hours, and there's no guarantee you will get fuel because many petrol stations are just turning away customers.
Some people we spoke to in Colombo said they had to wait up to 12 hours in line for fuel. How did Lanka get here? It all started when the country's foreign reserves began bleeding. Soon, the country ran out of dollars to buy fuel, food, and essential commodities. Is a respite at sight? Here's what Prime Minister Wickremesinghe has told us.
How long do you think recovery will take?
I think recovery, stabilization and recovery will take about 18 months.
Not long ago, Lanka received a shipment of oil from Russia. It also received Siberian light crude under Emirati credit. Currently, Sri Lanka owes the world over $52 billion. The government says it needs $5 billion over the next 6 months just to get basic supplies. It is a dire situation. And the fuel crisis isn't the only thing hitting a new low. People's falling purchasing power is quickly dragging them into poverty. Latest data reveals that the poorest 40% of the Lankan society aren't making enough to put 3 meals on their table. They are making an average of 26,931 Lankan rupees a month, which is around $74. It is not enough to buy basics in a country battling a double-digit inflation.
Sri Lanka is dealing with an invisible enemy, their economy. But that's not the case with Taiwan. Taiwan's enemy is very much visible. It is located just 100 miles off their coast. It is communist China. For them, Taiwan is unfinished business, a piece of land that is rightfully theirs, but the people of Taiwan have different ideas. They value their democracy, their freedoms, things that make Taiwan a distinct society. They have their own army, their own parliament, their own president. Yet one key ingredient is missing, a formal declaration of independence. You see, Taiwan developed organically. They never declared official independence from China. Why not? Because it's a sensitive issue. Leaders in Taiwan had 2 options. They could preserve the status quo, or they could declare independence and risk a war with China. So every leader stuck with the status quo. And on Sunday, China's defense minister showed us why.
If anyone dares to secede Taiwan from China, we will not hesitate to fight. We will fight at all costs, and we definitely will fight to the very end. This is the only choice for China.
That is why Taiwan never declared independence. Because if they do, China could attack them. And let's face it, Taiwan's military is no match for China. If Beijing attacks, they will need America's help. But will Joe Biden step up? is his Taiwan policy is all over the place. Sometimes he promises to defend Taiwan, sometimes he switches to strategic ambiguity. On Sunday, Biden's Pentagon chief had the chance to set the record straight. He was speaking at the Shangri-La Dialogue, and this is what he said.
And we stand firmly behind the principle that cross-strait differences must be resolved by peaceful means. Now, as a part of our One China policy, we will continue to fulfill our commitments under the Taiwan Relations Act. And that includes assisting Taiwan in maintaining a sufficient self-defense capability.
That is strategic ambiguity. It basically keeps China guessing. Will America come to Taiwan's defense or will it not? There is only one way to find out, and that's by actually invading Taiwan. No doubt Xi Jinping would certainly like that, but the risk is too high. Just look at what's happening in Russia. Dozens of sanctions, companies winding up operations. It's basically a stranglehold. The question is, does Xi Jinping want to risk that? Or does he want to keep postponing the invasion? Logic says postpone it. But for how much longer? What if Taiwan declares independence in the meantime? Beijing does in fact seem to have a strategy against that. Number one, the scare tactics. All the incursions into Taiwan's air defense zone, all these warnings of war, they're all meant to keep Taiwan under check. Sort of like a message to pro-independence parties. Number two, the diplomatic offensive. And this explains why China is obsessed with the One China policy. They want to keep Taiwan isolated, basically cut off any direct assistance. Just think about it. Who is Taiwan's biggest ally against China? It is the United States. And yet the same United States does not recognize Taiwan as a country. Strategy number three, the economic offensive. The latest example is this one. China has banned the import of grouper fish from Taiwan. What's their excuse? Apparently, the chemical content in the fish is too high. It's an old Chinese excuse. Last year, remember, they banned the export of fruits from Taiwan. Same reason. Higher chemical content, they said. But this time, Taiwan is threatening action. They're planning to take China to the World Trade Organization, the WTO, and frankly, they have no choice. China makes up 91% of Taiwan's grouper fish exports. That's worth more than $50 million. Overall, trade between China and Taiwan is $166 billion. Now, do you see the problem here? Taiwan faces an existential threat from China, but that same China is their biggest trading partner. And why just Taiwan? Most countries in the Indo-Pacific face the same dilemma. I'll give you two examples from the Shangri-La talks. Japan and Australia. Both countries held talks with China. Japan agreed to boost defense dialogue with China, while Australia said it was seeking productive relations. Listen to this.
So our focus is going to be on taking Australia forward and our place in the world in that way. And we do, consistent with that, want to have a productive relationship with China. So we will keep working as we can to try and have that evolve in the context of making it very clear that there is that this happens without any conditions at all.
So trade is China's most potent weapon against Taiwan, against Australia, even against Japan and India, which is why economic partnership in the Indo-Pacific will be key. I'm talking about new supply chains, new investment projects, new trade deals. As long as you buy from China, you cannot battle China. That was a big takeaway from the Shangri-La dialogue. For the moment, we'll shift our focus to Europe. The war in Ukraine has been taking some very interesting turns. What began as a fight for land 3 months ago soon became a war for narratives and then turned into an oil war. Over the weekend, the war took another turn. This was when Russia began handing over passports to Ukrainians. 110 days into the war, Russia deployed its tried and tested weapon in Ukraine. 23 people in Kherson were given Russian passports. The list includes the town's governor.
With pride in my heart, I congratulate everyone who has become a citizen of a vast, great and just country. This is another proof that Russia will not go anywhere. We stay here forever.
Why is Russia distributing passports? To solidify its hold over the occupied areas. The red booklets have a proven track record. Long before Russia invaded Ukraine, it was handing out passports to the residents of Donbas. In the years preceding the war, over 720,000 fast-track passports were issued. Nearly 18% of Donbas population were given Russian citizenship. Then Putin went to war on the pretext of protecting his own people, the ones with the Russian passports. Ukraine says Putin is trying to Russify the rest of the region. And that is the plan, to distribute passports to the occupied regions. It was approved by Putin on the 25th of May. Weeks later, Kherson's governor has a Russian passport. Volodymyr Saldo was installed in office by Moscow, in fact, and he now rules over a city of 280,000 people as a legit Russian official. Let's show you where Kherson is located. It's a port city on the Black Sea. It borders Crimea. Russia claims full control of Kherson, also full control of adjacent Melitopol. Something similar is happening there too. A passport office has been opened, and every day people are flocking there. Whether they're doing that voluntarily or not, we do not know. Russia's state media outlet TASS says 70,000 people in Ukraine's Zaporizhzhia have also applied for Russian citizenship. Now, you know what these passports do? They solidify Russia's claim over occupied regions. They also take Putin one step closer to his long-term goal, the goal to rebuild or recapture the Russian Empire. In fact, Russia is calling this passport drive a return of citizenship.
The work on the return of Russian citizenship, let me say it this way, is proceeding at a record pace, faster than it was on the territory of the Donbas. Every day, thousands of people come to the passport office. More than 100 questionnaires and fully completed packages of documents for the Russian citizenship are processed daily, and they are immediately sent to the Russian Federation.
So that's Russia's side of the story. But why are Ukrainians accepting Russian passports? These are people who had pledged to fight for their country. Today they're giving up their citizenship. What explains this shift? Perhaps the hope of survival. Living in an occupied region as a Ukrainian must not be easy. So the Russian passport becomes their badge of safety. Plus, it allows them to travel to Russia to get benefits that Russian citizens are entitled to. Free healthcare, for example. Services that a common Ukrainian today is struggling to access.
I'm happy. It's a historical moment in my life. A great historical moment. It's not only my happiness. I think there are lots of people here in Ukraine who have been waiting for this moment too.
But is this even legal, this switching of passports? If proper signatures are in place, then yes, it is legal. Moscow is a veteran in this game. It has been weaponizing passports for a long time now. People living in former Soviet republics are given Russian citizenship very easily. In 2020, for example, more than 6,000 people from Moldova were given Russian passports. 3,000 plus from Tajikistan, nearly 1,500 people from Armenia, more than 1,000 from Kazakhstan. Today, nearly 50,000 Russian passport holders live in Moldova, which, as some reports say, is the next in Russia's line of fire. So this is Russia's passport warfare. But in West Asia, such subtle strategies do not work. Warfare usually means hard military power, and pretty soon that could also mean nuclear weapons. Iran is now closer than ever to making a nuclear bomb. Where does that leave the 2015 nuclear deal? On life support. When Joe Biden took office, he promised to revive the nuclear deal. He initiated talks. For months, Iran and other world powers held meetings in Vienna. There were public spats, back-channel discussions, and finally, in March 2022, there appeared to be progress. Iran said it was closer than ever to clinching a deal. Cut to June, all hope has been dashed. The Iran nuclear deal is back on ice. So where did things go wrong? The latest trigger is a report by the United Nations atomic watchdog, the IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency. What does this report say? That man-made uranium particles were found at 3 undeclared Iranian sites. So what did the watchdog do? They passed a resolution against Iran. It accuses Tehran of not explaining the uranium traces. Needless to say, Iran responded. They have removed 27 surveillance cameras from their nuclear sites. And these cameras were installed as part of the 2015 deal. Now, all of them have been taken down. The IAEA chief has called it a fatal blow to reviving the deal.
This, of course, poses a serious challenge to our ability to continue working there and to confirm the correctness of Iran's declaration under JCPOA.
So the JCPOA is dead if it's not done within the next 4 weeks?
I think this would be a fatal blow.
Why is Iran suddenly playing hardball? We can think of two reasons. Number one, the war in Ukraine, it has put the focus firmly on nuclear deterrence. Just think about it. Would Russia have invaded a nuclear-armed Ukraine? Chances are it wouldn't have. But Ukraine gave up its nuclear arsenal in the 1990s and now it is under attack. For policymakers in Tehran, the takeaway was clear. Nuclear weapons help. That's reason number one. Reason number two is that Iran is better placed to demand more concessions. For starters, they have enriched uranium to 60%. Now 90% is weapons grade. So Iran is dangerously close to making the bomb from 60 to 90. And that gives them an edge in negotiations. So do the rising oil prices. Think back to 2021. Oil prices were slowly recovering after the COVID crash, so sanctions on Iran made little difference. With or without Iranian oil, prices remained low. That's not the case anymore. Right now, Brent crude is trading at more than $120 per barrel. So lowering oil prices is America's top priority. And how do you do that? By pumping more oil into the global market. Enter Iran. Before US sanctions, Iran produced 4.7 million barrels per day. That oil could help cool global prices. But to unlock that oil, the West must remove sanctions. So Iran is playing the long game. As they say, America may have the watch, but Iran has the time, which brings us to the man behind this debacle, Joe Biden. He passed up a great opportunity. By March 2022, this year, Iran was ready to strike a deal. All they wanted was some goodwill, perhaps some sanctions relief, and why not? It was the United States that abandoned the nuclear deal, it wasn't Iran. So the US had to take the lead in reviving it. Unfortunately, Biden did not do that. He stuck with Donald Trump's maximum pressure sanctions. He refused to give any concessions. And look where we are, almost at the point of no return. What can Biden do to salvage the situation? Well, Iran knows exactly what it wants. Number one, remove Iran's Revolutionary Guard Corps from the US terror watch list. And number two, a promise that America will not walk out of the deal again. And the second demand is impossible. The nuclear deal, you see, does not require congressional approval, which means any Republican president can repeal it. It is basically beyond Joe Biden's powers. The first demand about the Revolutionary Guard Corps is doable, but it's tough. Republicans are already opposed to reviving this deal, the nuclear deal. If Biden tries to denotify the Iran guards, it will further divide Congress. Whatever he decides, he needs to do it fast because Israel is watching from the sidelines. Last month, they conducted a special military drill. Guess what they practiced? Striking Iranian nuclear sites. So this is how things stack up. Israel is already preparing their backup plan. Iran is a stone's throw away from weapons-grade uranium. And Joe Biden still cannot decide what he must do. So much for a foreign policy veteran. And we end the show with a story from Britain, a country that keeps outdoing itself, and not in a good way. The British government has unveiled a new refugee policy. Here's how it works. Imagine you're a refugee arriving in Britain. You reach one of their immigration centres. Your goal is quite clear. You want to secure asylum in Britain and hopefully begin a new life there. Well, it may not be possible anymore. A new British policy lets the government deport refugees to a third country. Guess which one? Rwanda. Now, the obvious first question is, why Rwanda? It is located almost 6,500 kilometers away in another continent, which is not exactly convenient. So why is Britain sending refugees all the way to Rwanda? No answers. But listen closely to their plan. Britain will have no responsibility vis-a-vis these refugees. They will live under Rwandan law. And even that is not a guarantee. Because once they land there, the government, Rwanda, will decide whether to grant asylum or not. If you get asylum, you can live there for 5 years. After that, you must find a new home. If you don't get asylum, you'll have to leave. So Rwanda is doing all the heavy lifting. Then what exactly is Britain providing? It's giving a one-way ticket, that's it. And this scheme is problematic for two reasons. Number one, the audacity to dump refugees into an African country. They're not even trying to hide the racism. Listen into the Prime Minister, listen to what he said, Boris Johnson defending his policy.
This is about making sure that we break the business model of criminal gangs who are not only risking people's lives, but undermining public confidence in legal migration. We want to stop the illegal migrants from coming in, and we want to deter the criminal gangs, because they're not only endangering their lives, they're ripping them off.
Still doesn't answer the question, why Rwanda? Boris Johnson says criminal gangs are smuggling refugees into Britain. Perhaps they are, maybe they are, and Britain has every right to deport them. But why to Rwanda? Why not a European country or a North American country? Because they would never accept these refugees. So what does Boris Johnson do? He ships them off to Africa. That's problem number one. Problem number two is Rwanda's own political situation. Remember, these refugees are looking to start a new life. They're not there for tourism. They're there for safety. Does Rwanda guarantee that? Far from it. Rwanda has among the worst humanitarian records in the world. They persecute LGBTQ community members, government critics, opposition leaders. You get the idea. So why is Britain sending these refugees to Rwanda? Simple answer, to save money. Britain's asylum system costs around $1.8 billion. Around $5 million is spent every day on housing alone. Compare that to the new program. Britain has managed to strike a deal with the Rwandan government. Total cost, $140 million. Britain will invest this money in Rwanda. In return, Rwanda will host deported refugees. Let's not call this a refugee policy then. Let's call it what it is. A financial transaction where humans are commodities. This policy was personally approved by Home Secretary Preeti Patel. She flew down to Rwanda to sign the deal herself. But implementing it is not going to be easy because activists are up in arms. They have filed court cases against the new program. Some of those hearings are underway. If the court does not raise an objection, the first flight to Rwanda will leave on Tuesday. 11 refugees will be on board that plane. Activists are hoping for a favorable ruling. They believe the policy violates international refugee laws.
Our concerns are that the policy might not in fact be lawful, that it might contravene international refugee law and human rights law. And we think it's very important that the case is heard and this is properly determined before anyone is sent to Rwanda.
Guess who else is opposing the scheme? According to some reports, Prince Charles. He described the refugee program as quote-unquote appalling. Now, if this is not a wake-up call for Boris Johnson, I don't know what is. The sign of a monarchy that perfected slavery and colonialism is criticizing your treatment of refugees. It doesn't get worse than that. And I'm not saying that Britain should welcome every refugee or that it should throw open its borders. That's for the government to decide. That's fine. But this is not the way to do it. You cannot dump refugees in Africa and forget about them, or pay your way out of international commitments. But Britain does not seem to care. In the 18th and 19th century, they sent prisoners to an obscure island in the southern hemisphere. Today we call it Australia. It became a dumping ground of British prisoners. This refugee policy is no different. Britain is turning Rwanda into a dumping ground of refugees. Let's take a look at what else is making news across the world. This is Gravitas Global Headlines.
Ukrainian forces pushed back from the center of Severodonetsk as Russian artillery pounded parts of the city and hundreds of civilians took shelter at the city's Azot chemical plant. The leader of the Russian-backed separatist Donetsk region of Ukraine says there was no reason to pardon two British nationals who were sentenced to death last week after being captured while fighting for Ukraine. Authorities in China's capital, Beijing, raced to contain a COVID-19 outbreak traced to a 24-hour bar, with millions facing mandatory testing and thousands under targeted lockdowns. In Taiwan, hundreds of Hong Kongers and their supporters marched on the streets in the capital city, Taipei, commemorating the third anniversary of the anti-extradition law protest. Amid global economic concerns, the Indian currency has fallen to its lowest ever value against the US dollar and breached the 78 rupee per dollar wall for the first time. 73 lawmakers from the Sadrist bloc in Iraq's parliament, the biggest bloc in parliament, resigned amid a prolonged stalemate over forming a government. After rains and hailstorms caused heavy flooding across north and central Turkey, schools remain shut in Ankara because of the weather warning. 3 people have died and 1 person remains missing near the capital. Evacuations are in effect in parts of northern Arizona as a wildfire steadily grew. The fire had burned approximately 4,000 to 5,000 acres by late Sunday. Rory McIlroy has retained the Canadian Open title with a 2-stroke victory in Toronto, with his 21st win on the PGA Tour. He passed Greg Norman's mark, and McIlroy later said he had extra motivation to surpass the head of the Saudi-funded Live Golf Series. Russian Daniil Medvedev has replaced Novak Djokovic as the new men's world number 1. Djokovic has, in fact, dropped to 3rd place and could even fall out of the top 10 by September, with no ranking points on offer in Wimbledon.
With that, it's a wrap. We're leaving you with Gravitas images. Thanks for watching.
Sharma.